That's the thing. Like if you meet somebody who is like, I really like Dune, and you're like, oh, I really like Dune too. There might be other people listening who are like, oh, those are two guys who really like Dune.
So there's the risk of being labeled or stereotyped as a Dune liker.
A beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. This every sister of the Bene Gesserit knows. To begin your study of the life of Muad'Dib then, take care that you first place him in his time, born in the 57th year of the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, and take the most special care that you locate Muad'Dib in his place, the planet Arrakis. Do not be deceived by the fact that he was born on Caladan and lived his first 15 years there. Arrakis, the planet known as Dune, is forever his place.
From the Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Irulan.
I'm Stephen Guidry, an art director for film and television.
And I'm Marlon Olivier, a music librarian and archivist.
And we love Dune.
We really love Dune.
So much so that we've started this podcast, a chapter-by-chapter analysis of the novel Dune by Frank Herbert from 1965.
And all the additional movies, video games, and media we can think of.
And more!
And more!
And more!
We're not going to explain every term or character unless we feel the need for context. So this is sort of a book club.
Right. So, in other words, you should read the book, because otherwise...
We've got spoiler signs, the likes of which even God has never seen.
This chapter, the first chapter in the book, starts on the planet Caladan, where a sleeping Paul Atreides overhears his mother Jessica talking with the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohaim. So Marlon, of the three names of the Reverend Mother here, which one is like the most normal of the names?
That would have to be Helen, which is important because Helen Hunt is in the David Lynch film version of Dune, so there are some connections there. Just like to point that out to our Dune trivia hound friends.
What is she? She is?
Yes. Are you serious? That? Wait, no.
Helen.
Linda Hunt. Oh man, do we keep that? Do we keep that shit in there or not?
What a fact.
Anyway. Oh boy, I don't think I deserve to be on this podcast.
Gosh.
Helen Hunt, mad about you versus the killing fields. Get them two confused all the time.
I bring up the normal name because this is going to be a thing that happens all the time in Dune, where there'll be these people with very interesting names, strange names, unusual names, like Gaius and Mohaim, and then they'll have somebody else who has sort of a normal name, like Jessica and Paul and Helen, although maybe it's one L, so maybe it's Helene.
Queen Helene. The king of those being Duncan Idaho, who's the most white bread middle American Norman Rockwell-like character in House Atreides.
My wife calls him the Potato Man. When we're talking about the book, she's like, yeah, and then the Potato Man, what's the deal with him? We'll talk about the deal with Duncan Idaho. The more times I've read this, the stranger he is as a character.
Yeah.
You later find out, but reading this again, I was like, what does he do? What is his job?
Duncan Idaho gets a raw deal in the Dune universe, I think. He comes out of things pretty rough.
Yes. This whole chapter is so iconic to me, but I mean, immediately you start with this two people talking while Paul is sleeping. So we have these good themes of what people know and what people overhear and what they don't know. Sure.
You also have the Reverend Mother referring to Paul as a little rascal as he's sneaking. I misquote. It's not little rascal, but she does refer to him as a rapscallion in bed.
Yeah.
Right. Also not a direct quote.
Right, rapscallion rascal. She also says he's small, which I really like I feel like that's a thing that's often not in sort of versions of this, that he's small for his age. When I was a kid, it was very, I felt like the book was constantly reminding me that Paul is meant to be this kind of small, scrawny is maybe the wrong word, but that he's small for his age and everything like that.
Right. There's an emphasis of Paul as still a child in this chapter, with Jessica doing kind of motherly things for him, like taking his pants and his like regal Atreides kind of like jacket out with the very stiff collar and hawk insignias, and kind of brushing it off with a lint brush, hanging it up for him.
I do. I think it's worth noting that Paul is still dressed by his mother going into this next scene too.
So the next morning, Paul meets with the Reverend Mother, who asks his mother to leave the room and asks Paul to stick his hand in a peculiar box. What brand would you speculate makes the box, both in the Dune universe and in our world, if we were to have such a device?
So do you mean that the name has to work both in Dune and in our universe?
Not necessarily. You can do one example from Dune, one example from ours. Like you could say, if you could justify that Apple manufactured the box, and perhaps elaborate on why. Or you can say some Dune brand. Oh, you still can. You still can.
Now I can't say Apple. So I guess this will count for both. The company's name is Pretty. Pretty. Pretty, because at some point I really like that the Reverend Mother says that someone would pay a pretty to find out the secrets of this box. I like that expression. So it would be called pretty, maybe even pretty pain devices. I don't know. That may just be this division that makes the box.
Sure.
Which never gets a name, right? It's just a pain amplifier box, a green pain amplifier box.
Yeah, this is the only time it's referenced in the book. It's just given that generic description. Yeah, there are certain things in the book you don't know if these are the official names or not. Like later we have a cone of silence, Is that just what they call it? Is that like the official name? Same things with terms like technology terms like glow globes, suspensor orbs, things like that. They're called by lots of different names under different like circumstances and stuff.
I think that's part of Frank Herbert's tendency in this book to de-emphasize technologies as such. It's like he doesn't want us to constantly be wondering about, is this a thing I know of? Is this a thing I don't know of? Like he'll explain the technology that he needs us to know. So I wonder if sometimes the sort of difference between a generic name and a more specific name has to do with that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like he's being very casual, very blasé about it, the way we describe like a shoebox or something, in our world without much emphasis on it, because that's not the point.
There are going to be scenes, we'll talk about them, where characters are specifically talking about technology and it has a sort of larger theme where they're going to have some Fremen technology later, and Paul will comment and say, wow, this is blah. He'll say whatever he says about the technology, but it's like only those little moments kind of need calling out.
Sure. So pretty pain device or pretty pain machine, something like that. I like it.
Pretty pain machine. Pretty pain machine.
Pretty works really well, I think, because there's definitely like a witchy thing going on with the Reverend Mother in this chapter. So I think my pretty jives pretty well with that.
Yes, my pretty. She's described almost like a cartoon witch.
Right, the spiderweb hair is like the real sticking point for me. I just
and she always says
everyone's okay. So in my mind, everyone is very well put together in the Dune universe. Outside of like characters that are very much drawn as peasants, or lower class.
Sure,
because there's so much kind of tact. And everything's so very deliberate. You assume that everyone's like dress is also very well put together, very deliberate. So the idea that the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit, who has this incredible control over her mind and body, would have this matted spiderweb hair. You'd think every strand of the Bene Gesserit's hair would be accounted for and perhaps important in some sort of communication or something.
Look, when you're a Reverend Mother, spiderweb hair, don't care.
Don't care, spiderweb hair.
Don't care, spiderweb hair.
That's good.
I think that's what's going on there. Okay, so the box that we're talking about, is the classic Gom Jabbar, which Paul passes. They basically, he put the little poison needle by his neck, and he keeps his hand in the box, and he thinks it's burning. So he passes the test. He's deemed a human, very complimentary. He's not an animal. And his mama is invited back into the room, and we're introduced here to the idea of the Butlerian Jihad. When you think about the Butlerian Jihad, what do you think about? What is it for you?
At some point in our far future, the people of Dune's far past that saw the elimination of anything resembling an artificial intelligence. Anything running any sort of logic no longer exists.
Okay.
The most powerful humans had the most powerful machines and would leverage them against, like, you know, the less powerful humans.
I mean, the good thing is that's not at all the danger that we have currently in our world.
Right. But it's also, I think, really representative of Herbert's tendency to want to culturally scramble things that exist right now. Like, it would have been very easy for him to call it the Butlerian Crusade, which would have matched up those sort of like Western elements a little bit better. But he intentionally like crosses those lines, those wires. Yeah,
even linguistically, right? The Reverend Mother says this phrase "kul wahad," which doesn't sound like, it's not like "gadzooks" or anything that we would be more Western, sure, or even in our world, which I think is interesting.
I mean, now that you mention it, though, Gadzooks would probably be better, like tonally, for Dune. Okay, so the final portion of this chapter gets into the Bene Gesserit's background and their plan for the Kwisatz Haderach.
I had to give you that word because I never think I'm pronouncing it correctly. You got it though. I think I can't. So this whole part is, I think, some of the best ending dialogue to maybe one of my favorite opening book chapters of all time. I mean, look, I'm a stand for Dune. I realize there's plenty of room to criticize, but I can't help it. So I really want to read this together. You be the Reverend Mother and I'll be Paul. Okay?
Gotcha. Many have tried the drug, so many, but none has succeeded.
They tried and failed? All of them?
Oh no, she shook her head. They tried and died.
That's it. It's so good.
Okay, so now that we've covered the chronology of the chapter, are there any last thoughts just related to general ideas or things we might have overlooked?
This chapter is such a microcosm of the whole book. It has all these themes. It has all these characters. I mean, it gets into, there's little hints at politics. There's little hints at what's really going on with the Bene Gesserit. You have Paul having about his sort of prescience that becomes a huge theme later. It's such a cozy chapter for me. Rereading it, I always come away with it loving how much like a crone witch the Reverend Mother is described as. And I really like the beginnings of the hints at Jessica and the Reverend Mother's relationships. Like, she asks Paul to sit at her feet, and she calls him little brother, which is really interesting when we're thinking about the Kwisatz Haderach as a male version of a Bene Gesserit. I love the way that there are all these little hints already seeded.
It's sort of a crystallization. It's like a mission statement of all of these things the book wants to explore. I love that the Bene Gesserit get into just all of these like touchstones, right? You've got the mind-body discipline, the it's a test of crisis and observation. You know, they get into the idea of sifting people, which is a really like elegant way of expressing the genetic manipulation they do, and the political manipulation. You get the litany against fear, like just straight up in this chapter. You get the voice in this chapter, and you have some suggestion as to how that works. It establishes some terminology that lets you know we're dealing with a feudal society, which may not be immediately apparent because someone approaching this is like general sci-fi might be surprised by that. And again, like you said, the relationships are really good. I love Jessica taking out Paul's clothes. I love Jessica like reiterating "my son lives" over and over again. That's a motif we're going to see like later in the book with these like familial bonds between Leto and Jessica and Paul. And the last thing I was going to say, you get your first taste of the fluctuation in Frank Herbert's writing in terms of quality and tone. Some things are like really like they nail the melodrama. Some come off as like kind of casual and goofy.
Dune has such highs and such lows. Often in the same chapter, you'll have this really amazing literary description of something, or a really effective little bit of dialogue, and then you'll just have this really silly description. He'll call some rocks. He'll be like, those rocks look like cheddar.
And that may be because, as you've mentioned, he may not have had a proper editor because the company that published the book, they didn't really deal in fiction and novels up until this point.
A little background is that the publisher just did, I think, mostly automotive manuals prior to that. And they bought a little fiction company. And this was one of their first books within the first couple of years. And it's this huge hit. But you can imagine, why would they have an editor really? I'm sure there was some editor. Somebody probably read it. But the idea that we now have that a first-time author of this kind of book, like Frank Herbert, would have an editor breathing down his neck, I'm sure. And this book very often feels like the work of someone who's way further along in their career and who kind of has no editor. And I think some of that tonal disparity might have to do with that.
Sure. And then not very self-conscious about what he's writing, and it comes off.
Oh, look, Maryann's here.
All right, that's enough of us talking about Dune. But did you know anybody can be a Dune buddy?
That's right, Marlon. So we're going to chat with our friend Maryann, who's reading Dune for the first time.
So, my name is Maryann, and I work in film and TV finance, and my weekend has been great. I'm in Southern California.
And you were sailing yesterday. We tried to do the interview. We may be able to use some of it. Interesting contrast.
Sure. One of my passions is sailing, so I try to get out on the water as much as possible.
And you brought Dune with you on the sailing trip.
I did. And the Captain Richard, he'd even read Dune, just coincidentally. And I thought that was funny. Like, how does this doctor know all about Dune? But people know.
Speaking of Dune, let's just talk really briefly. Have you ever read anything like this science fiction novel?
No. Thumbs down for science fiction. It's just not my taste. The closest thing I've ever read would be like Harry Potter, in terms of like a world or something where there's new vocabulary and just tons of characters that you have to keep track of and just things like that. Kind of like the Lord of the Rings, where they're hobbits and this and that. I did feel like if you liked Lord of the Rings, that you should definitely check out New Zealand, because it just seems like
that's a really good
land.
ad for the New Zealand Tourist Board.
That's it. Although I will say, as a kid, you'll be pleased to know the very first movie that I saw in a movie theater was Aliens with Sigourney Weaver. And I was like 7 years old when that came out. And I just thought like Aliens looked pretty good. And I loved it. It was intense. And then the next week we got another $20 to go to the movies. And I was like, I want to see Aliens again. And so we watched it again. So there's a possibility that I could like science fiction, but just overall, I'm just like, ugh. Does Mad Max with the Charlize, is that sci-fi? Yeah. I liked that one. That was cool. I love anytime you got like a badass female lead.
That's good news for Dune.
Really? Really? I thought it was about a little boy.
So did you have a sense of what Dune was or is before now at all?
No, I have zero idea. I've in fact read one chapter and I still don't know. The copy that I have has a little dude wearing a cape that's kind of, it looks like a desert landscape with red and orange colors, set upon like this kind of outer space type of backdrop. So it's like taking place in outer space. Wah, wah. That's a turnoff. I don't know why. I like looking up at the stars a lot. But the fact that this is like out there, it's, and also like I read the back of it too. The cover, it says set on the desert planet Arrakis. Dune is the story of this boy, blah, blah, blah. So it's set on some other planet that we've never heard of. That's fake. I do like the fact that people are vouching for it on the back. So I generally have a rule where I'll read 100 pages of something, and usually by then you'll be hooked.
Sure.
Although with that, I did read one of those Ayn Rand. It was horrible. It was like 500 pages of something, and I got to page 490 and just threw it in the trash. I couldn't take it anymore. I was like, you're not enjoying it? Just give it up. This is too much pain. I'm doing this for the wrong reason. I'm like pushing through in order just to say that I finished the book and I hated the book and I want to purge it from my memory.
Well, at least this time the reason will be because you're trying to make Marlon and myself happy.
And I'm, and the people on the back, they're like, it's unique. I like that. It's powerful, convincing, and ingenious. I like that. Astonishing. Okay. I am curious, genuinely curious as to how it can endure the test of time. Like it is, like you say, on the New York Times bestseller list, period.
Okay. The little intro paragraph. Can you read that to us?
A beginning is the time for taking the most delicate care that the balances are correct. This, every sister of the Bene Gesserit knows. To begin your study of the life of Muad'Dib, I hate the fact that I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name, then take care that you first place him in his time. And why you gotta word it that way? Look at the syntax. Born in the 57th year of the Padisha Emperor Shaddam IV. Like, what time is that? Seriously, like they're already just trying to confuse you. And take most special care that you locate Muad'Dib in his place, the planet Arrakis. Oh, already just killing me. Do not be deceived by the fact that he was born on Caladan, thumbs down, and lived his first 15 years there. Arrakis, the planet known as Dune, is forever his place. Now, why can't we just call it Dune from the jump? Why do we have to call it Arrakis? I'm already like, this is just triggering me. Annoyed. From the first intro, I'm like, gosh, I wish they didn't have that intro.
And so that's
like easier for me to get going.
There's a little bit more though. Finish the last little bit.
Oh, right. That's written by this. From Manual of Muad'Dib by the Princess Erlan. So already, all right. There's a manual. Annoying. There's now a princess involved, which could go either way, but you're definitely telling me this is one strange world on a planet with people whose names you can't pronounce. Like, it's extremely just way out there. I don't want to complain too much, but it's just like the very first opening. Like these little opening paragraphs and quotes are supposed to be fun. It's supposed to get you really like excited about what you're going to read. And instead, I'm a little like...
So what happens in this opening chapter?
What happened? So there is a dude, he's probably like 14 or 15, teenage dude. He's apparently human, which is now a big deal. So I'm like, God, now we're dealing with robots or some other species. Gosh. Anyway, he's sleeping, and then this old witchy woman comes over and basically talks to his mom and is like, I think he's like the one. I saw Matrix, by the way. Is that sci-fi? I like Matrix.
Okay.
Anyway, Keanu. Anyhow, so there's the boy, he's sleeping, the witch comes over and she's like, okay, I'll come back tomorrow and do the test, basically. And so there's a little test, he comes back the next day, the witch comes back the next day, and the boy can sense that the mom is like feeling a little bit afraid of the old woman, and, she's basically nervous about whether or not her son is going to pass the test. And it's a life or death kind of test. And it's basically the boy has to put his hand into this green box, and that is testing whether or not he's human, if he can feel pain. And so he puts his right hand into this box. And in the meantime, there's some sort of witchcraft or something. I don't know how they do it, but it's like, it's creating pain. and he cannot remove his hand. He can't flinch. And if he flinches, he gets stabbed in the neck with a needle full of poison, the Gom Jabbar, something. And I hate the fact that that is called Gom Jabbar. Like, why? Anyway, so the whole thing is a test by the witch, which he passes. He withstands all the pain. The mom is really happy. And then the witch thinks like maybe he's the one. And there's some other phrase, Kawasaki, Hashabaki, something, that he might be this special person, like the savior of their planet or whatever. So he's like a special boy.
Okay, I think that's actually a really good summary.
I feel like a lot happened, and I do like, just like, I guess, a critical way to look at it. I like the fact that the author got straight to it. He's like, okay, here's our protagonist, and here's a bit of a challenge for him off the gates, life or death. Stakes are pretty high. So I did like that. And it was not lost on me that there is somebody with a role of Master of Assassins. And that speaks to my heart. That's a pretty good name. That's a pretty good title. Like, I would love to be a Master of Assassins. Jeez.
So if you ever see something that you don't understand, you can look it up in the glossary.
This sucks. Look at this. Oh, I didn't even see that. You're telling, it's like a dictionary and a glossary. You're right. Oh, that sucks that there has to be this kind of thing in this book. Oh boy.
Right. So like,
necessary.
Gom Jabbar is in there, for instance, and
I didn't know that.
And in the preceding appendix, there are some characters. And so like Shaddam the Fourth, who you mentioned in the beginning, is in there and stuff. So just
in appendix number 4, everybody, appendix number 4. Quaisach Haderach, shortening of the way. This is the label applied by the Bene Gesserit to the unknown, for which they sought a genetic solution. A male Bene Gesserit whose organic mental powers would bridge space and time.
So as you are right now, getting to the end of this chapter, are you feeling excited to see where this story goes?
Not really, but I respect that the author put us in this like predicament of like, okay, here's the boy, he just, passed this challenge. So obviously something else, because he keeps mentioning like, okay, this must have been a really important test. And, like he's basically mimicking what the reader's thoughts would be. Like, oh, this must be important. And
what's your impression of the character of Jessica?
She seems like a good mom, loving mom, stern. Obviously, the life has been hard on them in some way. But I think she's a good mom, and I think she has to do tough things, like stand outside a door and wonder whether her son is going to live or die. It's been mentioned already, like her son was like, okay, she tells the truth about things.
What are your impressions of Paul Atreides?
I like that you have now defined his name as Atreides. Okay, that's helpful because when I read some of these things, when I read Russian novels, I make up the names just to make them a little more palatable. Paul Atreides. So far, my impressions about Paul, like a textbook protagonist. Like there's nothing wrong with him. He talked back to the old woman just a tiny bit because he's a teenager and, he's good though. It's like there's nothing to dislike about him. He's a teenager. He's a good boy. Exactly. He's a good boy. Listens to his mama.
And what is your impression of Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohaim? Is her name, right? What's your impression of her?
When I read that name, boy, my mind was like, oh. But my impression of her is that she's a stern person, but she has a difficult role. So in some capacity, I see her as somebody that's doing a difficult task What struck me as weird is she cursed Jessica at some point for not having a girl. And I was like, what? That's annoying. Like, who gets to choose what you're having? No, don't tell me there's other stuff going on in this planet that they're on. Like what? But overall, I think that she's sort of that stern witch person is like in a role of, trying to help society, even though her methods are unorthodox. I think at the end of the day, like she's doing her best to like find the human or the person who's bridging the gap between like whatever crisis that they're having. I think they need humans because humans have original thoughts. That's my take on it. And so they're trying to like sift the sand through the screen or whatever it was.
Was there anything in this chapter that seemed like it was more fantasy or magical rather than science fiction?
Oh, well, the voice. Oh, it's so annoying. Oh, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. So overall, I liked what happened. But yeah, the fact that there's some sort of like telepathy or voice control.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to get your take on what you thought of the voice. So thank you.
Thumbs down. Thumbs down, but it's going to make, I guess, things challenging if people can read your mind. How are you going to plan a revolution if there's mind control or something?
All right, so this is perfect. So our next section is Kulwahad versus Gom Jabbar. And it's perfect because both of these phrases are coined in this chapter, both by the Reverend Mother. As we said, she talks about the Gom Jabbar, and she says, Kulwahad at some point. And according to the index, Kulwahad literally means I am profoundly stirred. So it's a good thing, kind of.
Yeah, it's a thumbs up, And
Right.
its opposite would be the Gom Jabbar. And though we are, in this case, comparing an exclamation and a noun, they both serve the same purpose. One stirs you deeply, and one basically just stops you in your tracks. So it is the ultimate thumbs down is the Gom Jabbar, and that's what we'll be rewarding. Any bit of text or dialogue that we think is a little atonal or awkward or just doesn't make sense.
All right, so Marlon, what's your Kulwahad moment from this chapter?
My Kulwahad, it's like a couple things. I'm cheating a little bit here, but the first is
Cheating in the first episode.
I know. I mean, there's look, just starting things off on the right foot.
Continue.
So, the Reverend Mother is talking to Paul, and she goes, "A duke's son must know about poisons," she said. "It's the way of our times, eh? Musky, to be poisoned in your drink. Almas, to be poisoned in your food. The quick ones and the slow ones and the ones in between. Here's a new one for you, the Gom Jabbar. It kills only animals." And so I love this because, first of all, it's establishing that you live in a society where you have different terms for different types of poisoning that are kind of common knowledge. And then she introduces the Gom Jabbar, and she says it kills only animals, which implies some kind of like more intentional motive behind its use outside of a poison which will kill anything. There's some like greater authority behind it, some greater intentionality that I like a lot. It has to be both the will of the aggressor, the person with the Gom Jabbar, and the victim for the person to actually die, at least in the case, in the situation we have in this chapter. Like she has to threaten Paul with it, and then Paul has to submit to it by giving in to the pain test. I like that a lot.
Also, there's this little implication possibly that it's actually the poison is somehow filtered, is doing the filtering, right? Like, in other words, if you gave it to a human and you gave it to an animal, it would only kill the animal and not the human, which isn't really the case, but that almost seems to be what she's saying. It only kills animals, and then of course you realize that it's much more sinister because she's going to just stick him.
Sure.
I mean, she's making a decision, right?
Right. So, the surface read of it is innocent, right? Whereas the actual like motive and stuff is far more complicated.
Yeah, and he gets really indignant there too, which I like. It's very Paul like teen being like, Do you dare suggest the thought of a duke as an animal? Which I like, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so I love all the dialogue between her and Paul. Like another slight kol-wahad is, you mentioned earlier, little brother, sit here at my feet. And then very soon after that, she goes, you hate us a little, eh? And she asks Jessica, have you ever stopped hating me? And Jessica says, I both love and hate you. So I love that, like, that the Reverend Mother's like, oh, yes, I know you hate me, you and your son. It really works for me. So my Gam Jabbar is related.
You asked me what my kol-wahad.
Okay.
We do 2 kol-wahads then, so it's
Gotcha.
not one person.
Okay, and what is your kol-wahad moment, Stephen?
All right, well, I'm going to stick to one because I follow the rules. My kol-wahad moment is, again, something from the Reverend Mother. She says, this is midway through. He's got his hand. Paul has his hand in the box, and it's starting to tingle and maybe starting to itch a little. And it says, the tingling became an itch. The old woman said, you've heard of animals chewing off a leg to escape a trap? There's an animal kind of trick. A human would remain in the trap, endure the pain, feigning death, that he might kill the trapper and remove a threat to his kind. And I mean, it's very, like, cool dialogue, but it's kol-wahad. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's pretty kol-wahad.
It's kol-wahad because it goes further than it needs to go. They could say the human will stay in the trap so that he can devise like a more cunning plan, or to not lose the limb, he'll endure the pain and overcome the situation. But I love that he's like, we'll kill the trapper and thus like protect like his own kind. It's great.
And the implication is that the human stays in the trap.
Right.
Because the animal chews its leg off to get out of the trap.
Sure.
The human doesn't necessarily escape from the trap ever in the scenario. It just the human kills the trapper, which is great to save its kind.
Sure.
All right, so that's my kol-wahad moment. And what is your Gam Jabbar moment?
Mine's pretty simple. It's just when the test concludes. It's just after the Reverend Mother says, you hate us a little, eh? That Jessica enters the room, and the text reads, the door flew open and Jessica stood there staring hard-eyed into the room. And I want to emphasize the door flew open. So it just seems kind of willful and kind of like emotionally indulgent for Jessica to like throw the door open. As a character who I always read as very composed,
She's described as very regal. And then this moment, right, her flinging the door open is very out of character.
Yeah, it's just a little atonal. So that's my Gam Jabbar.
You want to hear mine?
So, Stephen, what's your Gam Jabbar moment?
All right, so mine's pretty quick after my kol-wahad moment, which just tells you how often Frank Herbert will do something I like and then immediately after. So the book is full of, if you've read it, you know this, and if you've seen the David Lynch movie, you know it's full of interior dialogue. And this is a moment of interior dialogue. It's in general very important to the book, but there are times when it tonally feels like a thing a person doesn't really think. So Paul's got his hand in the box, the pain's getting really bad, and it says, his lips were so dry he had difficulty separating them. Okay, I like that. Then here's in italics, the burning. And then it moves on. He thought he could feel the skin curling back. It's just a moment. You don't typically think when you're experiencing pain. You very rarely put words. You think the burning. So it's just a sort of. It's a little purple prose here for me. So
yeah,
so
it's very very blunt and weird.
Yeah, so that's my Gam Jabbar moment from this otherwise pretty damn good chapter.
Yeah, overall great. So many concepts introduced. We get our first inkling of Paul's terrible purpose, which is going to be
his
theme.
What?
His terrible purpose.
Oh, that's got to be what he calls his penis, right?
Yeah, no, that's Paul's hog. That's his hog. Which is, that's throughout the series, the terrible purpose.
It's always right. Anytime we read those words, terrible purpose, we have to assume it's Paul's hog.
Yeah. But on that note, on the note of his hog,
let's call Will Mitchel.
Yeah, we're going to call Will Mitchel. We're going to call Will and talk to him a little bit more about Dune.
Yeah, it's our friend Will Mitchel is going to be a guest on the podcast. He is a computer programmer and sometimes sound artist, and we're going to ask him 5 questions about Dune. Will Mitchell, why do you love Dune?
I don't love Dune. Wait, who told you that I love Dune? I mean, it's okay. I love that other people love it. Wait, no, I don't.
Okay. All right. That's something to love, though.
What do you love Dune more than and less than?
I love Dune more than
words.
I love Dune less than I love fettuccine Alfredo. But I love it more than I love what do I love Dune more than?
God.
Goodness gracious.
I mean, should we throw things out? What about
like dog food?
What about raisins?
Oh yeah, okay, good one. Yeah, I definitely love Dune more than raisins.
Do you love Dune more than whole wheat bread?
Yes. I love Dune more than whole wheat bread.
Okay.
So we're triangulating in on the crucial questions.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next question. Maryann, that's you.
So, why do you hate Dune?
I hate Dune because I don't know, it's a little pretentious. Everybody's so good at everything, and I don't find that to be I don't find that interesting to read about. Like when you meet somebody and they like really like Dune, it's like a dangerous time.
Would you say it's a delicate time?
It's a delicate time. You don't know how that conversation is going to go because you might, like they might like it like a lot. It might be something that like basically gave them their foundational philosophy for living or something. People encountered that book at a vulnerable time in their lives.
In this chapter that we're talking about, the first chapter, the Reverend Mother, who's described as an old crone with bird-bright eyes, tests Paul Atreides with the Gom Jabbar. Will Mitchel, can you tell us about a time in your life when you were tested by the elderly?
I don't know. I feel like I'm being tested by the elderly right now.
Only slightly elderly.
I'm like, yeah, I don't even know like how old either of you guys are. I'm being tested by, the elderly who are listening to this podcast. They're thinking like, does this guy know anything? Has he even read Dune? Has he read anything besides Dune?
Do you even Dune?
Do you Dune? Dune you even?
Do you even Dune?
Okay, well, segueing from that, as someone who works with computers, how close do you think we are to the point where we'll turn our thinking over to machines, only permitting others with machines to enslave us?
I mean, like negative 2 or 3 years, or sort of like a couple years into it.
Oh,
I mean, people are going to protests that were like organized by like trolls in other countries. Like we're there, like we've been doing this. Like it's like people click a button and we do stuff.
Frank Herbert was very circumspect in saying the thinking machines, we got lazy, let them take over for us and let other humans sort of enslave us. Like it's
not
clever that he lays it on kind of both. The thinking machines are the thing that we don't want, but it's because of the way other humans were using them.
Yeah. I appreciated that a little more this time when I was rereading it. That it's not just like Skynet,
right?
Like it came before it, and it kind of like anticipated the problems of thinking that way. So.
Well, Will, thank you. Thanks. Honestly, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, thanks.
This is good. It's good to talk through this stuff. And just, do you have any advice for us now that we've talked through all this?
I would say that the best thing that you can do to prevent getting bored between the hours of 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. is to just take a quick nap.
Thank you.
A nap a day keeps the napes away. So.
I know. She could be lurking anywhere.
For me,
Marlon.
A nap a day brings the mapes.
brings the mapes. Yeah, she does kind of. I mean, it does remind me a little bit of the person who well, and the old crone too. You know, they hover and they sit on your chest at night. So that would never happen to Paul because he never actually sleeps. He just fakes being asleep. I don't think the guy slept for real like once in the entire point that I've gotten up to anyway. So, all right, I'll let you go. Thank you guys for having me on.
All right, now it's time for the Dune Film Club, where we watch some selected moments from both the 1984 David Lynch adaptation
and the 2000 Sci-Fi Channel adaptation. And that's how you know this is like a legitimate, serious film club, because we include the Sci-Fi Channel adaptation, which is really the film aficionado Janus Films Criterion Collection version of Dune.
That is true. That is true. It's like it's on Canopy. You know what I mean? It's one of those. It's
anyway. Look, we really should not set things off on the wrong foot of dissing on the Sci-Fi Channel Dune. I might absolutely love it watching it this time.
I think okay, and I think it's important that we force ourselves to do both a pro and a con for both of them. Every movie has pros and cons.
That's a great idea. And you know what? It's a very sincere adaptation, you know, like maybe a little too sincere at times given its production values, but it certainly tries.
Based on the chapter, based on what we've talked about, what are you hoping to see?
I want to see some of that relationship between Paul and his mother and the Reverend Mother. I want to see the intensity of the box scene. And I want to see the representation of like the production design of Castle Caladan, I think, just to get a sense of what this world's supposed to look like, because it's our first visual of it.
Yeah. On reread, I've got to like address the presence or the lack thereof of the Crone element of the Reverend Mother.
Yeah, the Crone style.
Style. Crone presence.
David Cronenberg.
The David Cronenberg-ness. All right, let's watch.
Let's do it.
A beginning is a very delicate time. In this time, the most precious substance in the universe is my father. Oh, yes. I forgot to tell you. Dune.
All right. David Lynch Dune, 1984.
Man, the opening, chef's kiss. Oh,
chef kiss. Zoom out of them eyes. Zoom out with that like crazy bass swoop. So good.
Virginia Madsen's with her super tight curls, and the fact that it's very distinct. There's something where they've cut the collar in a way that it really is very much like a floating head. It's like something out of
Baron Munchausen.
Baron Munchausen. It always reminds me of Baron Munchausen, the floating heads on the moon. And so she starts. She gives you the intro. So this is in the David Lynch version. She has this intro, and I don't know if you hear from her again later in the movie. I don't remember if she ever sort of narrates again. Of course, in the book, she is almost always, I think she's the source of all of the sort of chapter openers. So that's the version here, and it's great. They zoom out, she fades away while she talks about the spice, and you just see the universe, and she fades back, and then she fades out again, and she says, "Oh, I forgot," and she fades back.
It's very dreamlike. It's definitely like a stamp of David Lynch that she comes in and she's kind of giving you this kind of introduction to the world, but it's very strange, and it's the way it's paced, the way she fades in and out. There's one other scene kind of sandwiched between these, only because it's very brief and very kind of like effective in conveying the kind of pathos surrounding Duke Leto in his departure from Arrakis, and kind of not contrasting, but kind of supported by some suggestions the Reverend Mother has made that the Duke's future is bleak.
In the scene, the Duke Leto is sitting at his desk. Next to him is the first appearance of the Atreides pug, their family dog, which will have lots of cameos in the movie. And he's impressing his ducal signet ring that becomes very important in the next chapter into it's like, I guess it's like a tube that then has a little space that has some wax in there. So normally, obviously, you'd roll up your scroll and you'd seal the whole scroll with the wax. And I love that sort of weird medieval thing that this culture has so many of these medieval tenets that they're like, we need a little space on the tube where you can put some wax in.
It's so much harder than it would be than if you just put some wax on the paper, sealed it, and then put the paper and the seal in the tube. So this means they have to roll it up, put it in the metal tube, then line up the seam with the hole, put some wax in there, I guess, and then stamp it with the ring. Anyway, I'm sure the technology is supposed to be sleeker than that. I should say, though, when I was a kid watching this, I did not understand. I had never seen a ring seal a document with a wax imprint before. So I thought he was just like doing maintenance on his ring and like sticking it into some sort of like recess that like resurfaced it or like made it wet and red and stuff. And I just thought like you would do like a stamp that you're about to stamp something with, like a rubber stamp. I thought he kind of did that with his ring, not to stamp things, but just to like finish it, like dipping it, like pushing it into an ink pad. So it's a great scene. It's very simple. It's him doing that. Only one line of dialogue is spoken. He basically says, "Voss, dim the lights," and that's it.
And we see some glow globes, I think, or suspensor lights, whichever one they are, which David Lynch obviously loves. He opens and closes lots of scenes with them. They're always drifting around in the halls. And so then it's bookended again by the scene with the gum jabbar.
A human can resist any pain. Our test is crisis and observation.
I see the truth of it.
Could he be the one? Maybe.
I see the truth of it.
There is a place terrifying to us.
I see the truth of it.
Silence!
Then we skip a little bit ahead in the movie. We're at Castle Caladan, and we see Paul sleeping in his cool room. He's got this awesome headboard. It's a very teen headboard because he's got like his headphones up there. He's got his, MP3 player, and he's just got, his like some posters on the wall. It's very
baseball cards.
Yeah. Right.
You can't glean the function of anything, and it looks a little kind of elaborate and weird.
You don't know what is decoration and what's functional. I think that's a touchstone of the whole movie, is that everything has a little extra bit of design on it that doesn't need to be there. The whole interior of the castle is basically made of wood.
Yeah, it's all made of wood. The doors are all very heavy. The sound design emphasizes the opening and closing of doors. I think it's a wonderful way to illustrate the water abundance on Caladan, that there's so much wood that they can just like line these gigantic rooms with it and stuff. You also get lots of lightning flashing through windows, so lots of suggestions of like a moist environment.
So it was a dark and moist night.
Yeah, very moist.
I do not see as much of a Crone as I would like to. They literally shave her head instead of giving her the spiderweb hair. So it's really bald hair. No hair, don't care.
No hair, don't care. That collar is really popping. All the collars.
The Reverend Mother has no hair, and then Jessica has the most complicated hairdo. It has asymmetrical braids. All the pieces are sort of tucking and weaving into one another.
It's very much a Gary Oldman as old Dracula and Bram Stoker's Dracula, that like really taut knot kind of like pompadour that like folds into itself and looks like if you like cut like a single hair on it, it would like twang like a guitar string or something.
Everybody seems a little old to me. I mean, just especially... It's still in my mind's
You're like,
eye.
Speaking of old Dracula.
Speaking of old Dracula, you want to talk old. Lady Jessica is played by Francesca Annis, I think is the way you pronounce her last name. And Paul Atreides is Kyle MacLachlan, David Lynch's favorite.
And this was his breakthrough role, right? This is prior to Blue Velvet.
Yeah, right. So 1984. That makes sense. Okay. As a kid, my dad sort of had that 80s hair that I don't know what men, how even men did it, where their hair was just, I guess it was a lot of spray. So his hair is like my dad's hair in the 80s a little bit. And so I think that made him seem older to me when I was young. Now I look at him and I think he's a little baby. He's got rosy cheeks.
Yeah.
I want to emphasize the moment that I think is entirely just in the film versions. He's got his hand in the box. The Reverend Mother shows intense distress. Her metal teeth are gleaming because she's grimacing and she's sort of somehow sharing the pain, which is not in the book.
Yeah, she gasps Kol Wahad at the kind of climax of that moment. And that moment is presented to us as Paul's hand in the box with this like kind of overlay of like fire, in no way realistic. And then just a really interesting really interesting practical effect hand that's kind of like bleeding and withering and really grossed me out as a kid. I remember really looking forward to that part and seeing the gross hand anytime Dune would play on cable. And another highlight of that scene, I love that when she presents the box, the Reverend Mother goes, "You see this?" In this kind of like really uncharacteristically friendly way. And then she immediately like,
You see this?
engages something on the box that makes it snap really hard, like it's lid opening or something, but you don't see it. So you have to assume it's like a recessed door or something that's opening. So she goes, "You see this?" And then it goes like, clack, clack. And it's like both friendly and like super threatening at the same time. I really like that.
The scene also establishes the Gom Jabbar as sort of a thimble thing that sort of rides on the finger, rides on the finger, which is not described like that in the book, but it's so iconic.
Yeah.
It's hard to ever imagine the Gom Jabbar as anything other than a thimble with a needle involved, you know?
Right. It's simple and elegant, and it evokes this idea of like a seamstress a little bit, you know? The kind of like matronly nature of the Reverend Mothers and stuff. I always think of the Gom Jabbar as something a little smaller in my head, as something that's almost like a very small thing that fits as little surface area on the tip of the finger as possible so that it could be concealed or like kept in your hair. And then it would just almost like have an adhesive or some sort of like electrostatic thing where it would just kind of stick to the very tip of your finger.
Sure. So you can hold it.
But that doesn't read on screen very well.
Right. Yeah. And I do love that you mentioned the matronly nature of these women who have all of this stuff sort of secreted in the folds of their robes. They're always pulling out boxes and Gom Jabbars and, you know, hairpins or whatever. I do love that she pops it off of her finger and she just sort of puts it aside and you hear this sort of clunk. Like she's just resting it on like a side table in the room, which I think is very funny.
Take your hand out of the box and look at it. Young human.
There is in the scene a tell that is something in the book you don't learn much further along. And in general, I think both movies front load a lot of discussion of spice in terms of the guild, in terms of the Bene Gesserit. And she actually says something in this scene.
Do you know of the water of life? The bile from the newborn worms of Arrakis?
I have heard of it.
It is very dangerous. The Bene Gesserit sisterhood use it to see within.
Whereas in the book, that is many chapters in, before you even know that the Fremen are doing anything with the sandworms other than just avoiding them like everybody else assumes.
It's making a lot of leaps there. You know, like I don't know that the book ever says it's the bile. You know, this is just, I think, Lynch's simplifying of things so you don't have to get into, oh yeah, you have to drown a small worm and then this is the stuff it coughs up and all that stuff.
In the appendix, the water of life is defined as a, quote, illuminating poison, specifically the liquid exhalation of a sandworm, produced at the moment of its death from drowning, which is then changed within the body of a Reverend Mother to become the narcotic used in the Sietch, I never know, Sietch Tau orgy, quote, an awareness spectrum narcotic. If I'm not mistaken, and we'll get into this later, in the book, the Bene Gesserit don't use the water of life, nor do they even know that it exists. So there's already, and it's okay. It's just that's already a little bit of difference here.
Yeah. Let's watch the sci-fi Dune.
The sci-fi Dune, it is.
I mean, they're both sci-fi Dune, but this is the hard sci-fi Dune.
Was it FY in 2000 when this was made?
I don't know.
We have to look that up.
Good question.
So this is the Sci-Fi Channel version. We're going to watch it and we'll be right back.
You have given him your faith, Jessica.
I'm sorry, Your Reverence. If I could...
You're dismissed, Jessica.
Okay, so sci-fi version has some hats.
Yeah, it has some hi-hats.
Some hi-hats. Alec Newman as Paul couldn't be more different in my mind in terms of white men from Kyle MacLachlan. He's sort of thicker. His hair's short. He looks like a jock.
Yeah, he's kind of like a jock. Like he's kind of petulant, whereas like Kyle MacLachlan comes off as like a weird, awkward nerd. Alec Newman definitely comes off as like kind of willful, and I don't know. Like he does a thing where he sort of like splays out in a chair in a way that's very like teen angsty.
Yeah, he puts his feet on the table, which is so different than either the Paul Atreides in the book or Kyle MacLachlan, who's always sitting up very straight, almost unnaturally straight. You know, it's like he starts off throwing what could be like a dirty T-shirt at a hologram of Dr. Yui, who's wearing a hat. The hologram's a nice little cute effect.
There's such a contrast because the Lynch version has Paul like in a similar scene. Okay, so we did not watch this comparable scene, I'd say, but the first scene you get of Paul is him very studiously like reading a film book, you know? And in this, the first scene of Paul you get is him kind of like dismissing a lesson by throwing a shirt at it.
Right.
As you were saying, it's a good shot for this adaptation. Things tend to be fairly like straightforward in terms of the shot composition, but yeah, they do something interesting with the hologram if you want to go into that.
So it's basically a forced perspective shot where the hologram's in the foreground, and the way they shoot it, at the beginning you're not sure if there's a man standing in the room. Then as the camera moves around, you kind of reveal that it's small and on the table. It's basically Princess Leia doing the Obi-Wan Kenobi bit. It's about that tall, maybe a little taller, but more realistic. And it's interesting because it has a little bit of, this is trying, right? I mean, they clearly planned the shot and kind of thought about it, so it feels thoughtful, but it's so hard to like this Paul at all. You know, not even in like a charmingly kind of dorky way like Kyle MacLachlan.
Sure. Yeah, I'd say Lady Jessica fares better. Nothing extraordinary. She's kind of sporting a kimono.
Saskia Reeves, I think, is actually... she's very good. That's hands down, it's a pro. There are problems with the way she's directed, but yeah, she's good.
Yeah, she's good because she's not chewing scenery to the degree that a lot of characters in the film do. We should also note that the production design is drastically different to the extent that I at first thought that the sci-fi version started on a guild ship or some sort of spacefaring vessel instead of Castle Caladan.
It's just like kind of gray white, vaguely future nothing really. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it was green screen, which is fine. You have to deal with the budget you have, but the world that you get established in just feels like they're not trying. In contrast to David Lynch, where you're at this castle, it's raining, there are glow globes floating, things just have all this texture. There's not a lot of texture at all in this. And then we move to the friggin' room where the Reverend Mother is just waiting on her her personal throne that's set up in there with her staff stuck in the floor like something out of Indiana Jones.
It's very strange. Like any of the sets kind of associated with a particular house or culture, like outside of like the Fremen or something, but any of the spacefaring houses, you could almost interchange them with one another. That's how little they evoke of like the nature of the house, you know?
Yeah.
And the origin of the house. In the background, there are these two vertical rectangles of kind of like a water effect that you might see in like a 90s hotel lobby or something.
It's like a desk. It's like a thing you get from the Sharper Image catalog to have on your desk that would have
it's a water sculpture.
Yeah.
It's a water sculpture that like recycles it at the bottom and dumps it back out at the top, but done like wholly in CGI. So it's a weird kind of amorphous swirling that I think is supposed to be like Caladan, water here. See, water in the wall, either as art or being processed. So,
And okay, we're gonna have to talk about the costumes in this.
Yeah,
And I'm trying to kind of think of, there is something I like about any sort of costume that just goes for it.
right,
whether
it's bold.
They've got big sort of flaps, and she's wearing this headdress that looks, I don't know what it looks like. It looks like she's some kind of it's like a frill on a dinosaur from Jurassic Park, the ones that spit poison, and they have these like frills that pop up on the side of their head, but it's made of like clearly made of some like just paper, maybe
like some hard thick stock paper, or maybe even plastic cut into the shapes. I mean, it looks like two large paper plates kind of like with like kind of fit onto the top of the head, flaring out. And it's the sort of like awkward production design where it's clearly flimsy in a way that if this character of this standing had this hat, wouldn't want it to be flimsy.
Right.
So when she kind of moves, it kind of like bounces a little bit and stuff, and she must like get it caught on things all the time and get it like bent, like going through a doorway funny. It's a sort of hat that should be rigid, that she has to take off when things are informal to like go through doors and then puts on, but it's a mess.
I think it's supposed to sort of imply the sort of flying nun.
It is very flying nun. Yeah. That old type of like nun headgear.
And of course those sorts of things were kind of meant to imply that this person was outside of the world and sort of didn't need to. And I get it, but it just kind of doesn't work. It becomes distracting. It feels very different than David Lynch's Reverend Mother, who's not of the world and so has shaved her head.
Yeah.
She does do the thing that they established in the David Lynch, where she kind of experiences the trauma of the box. But really interesting, David Lynch always has. He includes lots of the interior dialogue. In the sci-fi version, I think they take out all of it, and if they really need someone to say it, they just say it aloud. So it's even more awkward, where Paul starts saying the litany against fear, and she has to reply, and she replies in this mocking way that doesn't feel right. She's like, "Oh, saying a prayer, are we?" Or she's like, "That's right, pray."
You must not fear. Fear is my cure.
That's right, boy. Pray.
I will face my fear.
Yeah, there's no affection. There is no like sympathy. There's nothing like empathetic or humanizing about this Reverend Mother. Like, I think the easiest like kind of point of comparison is to say that the Lynch version's Reverend Mother is someone you could see yourself studying under and like having like a meaningful conversation with. And in the Sci-Fi Channel, you're like, this person would be like so just insufferable to hang out around.
Yeah, I agree. I'm trying to come up with positive things here. But the end, I mean, I will say positively, Jessica doesn't throw open a door. She strolls in, and it makes sense. It feels more in character even than in the book when she slams the door open. But then Paul, like, he does this thing that he gets mad, and he's like, "Why didn't you tell me about this?" And he sort of pushes past his mother.
You should have warned me.
She was forbidden.
I'm sorry, Paul.
Which is, again, it's so strange for the relationship between Paul and Jessica that's been established in the book, even kind of in the movie.
It's very Luke Skywalker-y, you know?
God,
the whole thing.
It's even worse. But yeah, I mean, it's more Anakin Skywalker, honestly.
Yeah, you're right. More Anakin Skywalker.
I mean, you can imagine Alec Newman complaining about getting to Dune and being like, "Ew, it's got sand. I don't like sand. It's everywhere," whatever the hell Anakin says.
I don't like sand. It's coarse and rough and irritating, and it gets everywhere. Not like here.
It has a petulance that seems unearned and does not make you like him or identify with him. And he doesn't seem particularly like a teen doing it either. He feels very much like what he is he feels too old to be acting as petulant as he is.
It was awkward when he pulls his hand out of the box. I feel like it's really underplayed. You don't really it's just out, and then you're like, oh, it's out now and everything's okay. And it doesn't seem like he's reeling from it quite the same way. And
they cut to a wide shot, and the lights sort of come up brighter in the room as if the Reverend Mother, I mean, what, did she ask the house technicians to give her a little fader to hide in her pocket so she could dramatically fade the lights up after the test? It all just feels like a little... It's the sort of thing you'd do in a stage play and it would be fine, and in a movie it feels awkward.
And that applies to, I'd say, probably a lot of the Sci-Fi Channel version.
Okay, so I don't know if we hit our goal of trying to be positive about it as well as negative.
I like Saskia Reeves. She's good.
But yeah, there you go. There. I think coming away from
and the
that,
hologram, the framing of the hologram in that.
And the framing of the hologram. Yeah. All right, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks little brothers and little sisters for sitting here at our feet. Normally here we'd have some final thoughts about this chapter, but I think we sort of said everything, and I'm excited to move on to the next one.
And I'm really excited about the next episode and would like to thank everybody for listening.
All right, thanks again. I'm on Twitter at Zerobot, that's Zerobot. And yes, I'm a real person, even though it says bot in the name. The Twitter for the podcast is DuneBuddiesPod at Twitter. And please tune in to the next episode on the next chapter of Dune, in which the literal personification of fat phobia shows off his fanciest globe.
AKA Geedy Prime, no fatties allowed. And I can say that because I'm a fatty. But seriously, we're gonna go full RuPaul's Drag Race with these like crazy Disney villains next chapter. Can't wait.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to start with the first chapter. This chapter starts on the planet Caladan, where sleeping Paul Atreides overhears his mother Jessica talking with the Reverend Mother Gaius. Oh, sorry, hang on a second. My timer, I did 15 seconds. Oops. Let me do 15.
That's a short segment.
Okay. Let me give us a good 15.
Let's do it.
It
means very good time by the
I tried and died.